Now, India, like any aspiring so-called world power, has a lot of satellites that float above in the furthest reaches of the nighttime sky, and I presume take photographs of other countries and do all sorts of very fancy James Bond-like things. But it turns out that they have a lot of spare capacity. And if we can use it to do telemedicine, well, why not? We're all better off. And Devi's skill as an entrepreneur was in persuading the government that there was no skin off its back, that would make it look good, and it would help a lot of people. And that's the satellite spare capacity that's being used. That's entrepreneurship, working with people that don't quite see things your way, but persuading them to see things in your way. In a similar vein, look again at the graphic. There is a medical insurance system. I'm not quite sure whether Devi's health insurance system was the first case of medical insurance in India, but it was certainly one of the first. The idea that one of the obvious things one might say, living in the United States, that prevents people from seeking care is the absence of medical insurance. There's no medical insurance in India at the time that all this started. So Devi went to some, I remember, dairy cooperatives in the villages and got together a few million people and said, why don't you pay, I want to say 10 cents a month. The government will pay a matching amount. So that's persuasion of the government again. And with that very simple small sum of money, let's say $1 or $2 or $3 a year per person, we would have enough of a corpus available so that certain kinds of tertiary care could be administered either in his hospital or health city or in some of the other publicly available hospitals, which shockingly had spare capacity in them. That's entrepreneurship. That has triggered out a wave of reform and development of medical insurance efforts that are much more successful than his own. But the important thing is that this is a catalyst that triggered that important institutional innovation that actually helps the poor seek care, and so on and so forth. Now, when you step back, you say that medical insurance, medical buses, outreach, transportation, telemedicine, these are not things that a cardiac surgeon really wants to be doing. He wants to, in this case, deliver cardiac care, cutting-edge cardiac care, get better at his craft, see patients' lives being saved, and get a lot of joy and satisfaction out of it. But a practical entrepreneur recognizes that in a developing country like India, there are a number of things that I've called before institutional voids. That means exactly what it says. A void is something that's missing. So this is a service that we in the West, in a developed setting, might take for granted. It might be the ability to do outreach. It might be the ability to get your message out there. It might be the ability to physically move from one location to another. Imagine what would happen if there are no roads and no transportation mechanisms, which is the case for many of these patients trying to get to the health facility. The absence of medical insurance. All these absences, these voids, are things that prevent transacting partners from getting together. Now, it might seem crude to talk about a transaction in the context of life and death, but it is that. It is a transaction for healthcare. There is a buyer, a potential buyer of the transaction, the patient, and there is a potential deliverer of healthcare, who is the seller of that service. Now, that transaction may occur at a zero price, in effect, which is what happens with all the indigent in this hospital. But it has to occur, and at the very minimum, the buyer and the seller, in this case, the healthcare provider and the patient, need to be able to find each other. They need to have the information to do it. This is where the outreach comes in. And they need to have reassurance that if the care is delivered, that it will meet certain quality standards. That reassurance is non-trivial, particularly for someone who has lived his or her life in abject poverty, does not really ever deeply within himself or herself believe that such care can be accessible to them. That person really needs a lot of reassurance. That's where the medical education comes in. That's where the group society-based medical insurance comes in. That's where the credibility of the hospital comes in. So Devi's Health City is acting as what I call a credibility enhancer. That is just one sort of way in which an institutional void can be filled. By acting as a credibility enhancer, he is reassuring all sorts of transacting partners that the quality of care being delivered here is in fact reliable, reproducible, and something that you can go to the bank with. He's reassuring the patient. He's also reassuring the surgeons. Come to my system and I will credibly provide you with a setting where you can ply your wares. I will credibly provide you with a set of patients that you can help cure, and so on and so forth. He's credibly providing a reassurance to the providers of medical equipment, saying to them, come and experiment with me. Give me your latest technology. Give me your latest equipment. Make a deal with me, because I can credibly assure you of a stream of patients at a volume that you will not see anywhere in the world. And that is surely useful to you as the maker of a new medical device. So the idea of credibility in a low trust, low information, low ability to enforce contract settings should not be underestimated. And what it takes to develop that credibility and trust is the ability to step back and say, yes, I want to be a cardiac surgeon and I want to innovate in this space. But to do it, I'm going to have to fill a lot of institutional voids to make it happen. And that's what he's done.